It's a real joy to see so many people here tonight. We live in a world that's often divisive higher up, but people on the ground want to do their best to get along with each other. And it's a real opportunity for us to learn about each other this evening. I met Mo a few years ago. I went along to Dar al-Azra to hear her talk about the Virgin Mary, and with a friend from my previous parish and my mother. And then we went during Eid and had a very nice meal. Learnt lots as well, but the lamb was lovely. Not that I think with my stomach. And then my friend and I went along to visit a mosque day a few months ago, and Mo and I were talking by the door, and he said, "Can we come?" And I went, "Yes, please." So most of this has been arranged by Mo. He's arranged the speakers apart from Father Robert. And along with his team, I know he's training up a couple of young men to help him with the outreach. My job was to make sure there was Welsh cakes, because Mo likes Welsh cakes. So if I were you, I'd get there first. So I'm going to introduce our speakers and then hand over to them. We're going to go in chronological, historical age, not the age of the people, but that would make Sonia the youngest, I'm sure she is anyway, but in terms of religion. So, Mark, pleased to meet you, Mark. He was born in London in St. John's Wood and was brought up as an Orthodox Jew. His coming of age, bar mitzvah, was at St. John's Wood Synagogue, the seat of the chief rabbi of the UK. 30 years ago, he moved to Norfolk with his family, thanks to a good job offer and a wish not to bring up children in London. There was only one synagogue in Norwich, which was Orthodox, and he joined the steering committee of a liberal synagogue, which soon became established, and he served on their council and was made vice chairman. Work then brought him to South Wales, and he attended Cardiff Reformed Synagogue, and after about a year, he was asked if he wanted to come onto the council. This he did, and it wasn't long before he became chairman for 3 years. Sounds like the church, really. They ask you to do a job, you not let go afterwards. He is still on the synagogue council, precisely my point, helping the synagogue to become a community again after the pandemic. Passionate believer in interfaith, as he sees this will help bridge the gap between all religions. He is here tonight in his private capacity as a member of the South Wales Jewish community. Mo, I'm really sorry your phone's gone off while you're sorting that. My colleague Father Robert was ordained in 1991 and has spent most of his ministry here in the diocese, haven't you? And you've been in Barry itself nearly 20 years, as old as I am. I lie. Father Robert has a great interest in history and a great dry sense of humour. And I look forward to hearing what he has to say. Is there anything else you'd like me to add, Robert? No? I keep teasing him that he's going to start a holy war tonight.
I think I'm in more danger from the Christians anyway.
Sounds about right. And we're very lucky also to have Sonia Malal. Have I said that right, Sonia?
Yeah.
She's currently working at Cardiff Muslim Primary School for the 5th year as a Year 6 teacher. She's the Wellbeing Lead and PSE Coordinator, which is Personal Social Education. Been a teacher for over 17 years and is currently studying a Master's in Psychology and Mental Health. Robert, don't talk to her too much. We may lose you. She works with the Muslim community in Cardiff from a spiritual well-being and educational angle. In her spare time, she runs classes for the wider community, teaching the meaning of the Quran to enrich the Muslim community with the correct understanding of Islam. So what we're going to do is we're going to hear each of our speakers. We're going to start with the Jewish perspective on Jerusalem first, and then Father Robert will speak about the Christian, and then Sonia about the Muslim. After they finish their speaking, we will have some questions from the congregation, audience, whatever you want to call yourselves. Can I just remind you, this is an opportunity to learn from one another, and we may disagree about things, but one thing we are really clear on in the ministry area, Barry, is that we deal with difference well and with dignity. So if you do have questions to ask, we like to hear them, but please do not be rude, because we try to be kind and friendly. After the question time, there will be time for tea, coffee, the aforementioned Welsh cakes, and I believe there are some other cakes as well. So thank you for your time, folks, and it's lovely to see you. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mark to the... And that's your phone, isn't it?
Yes, I'll grab that. Don't want to lose that. Hello, everyone. I've got 10 more sets of these. It shouldn't take too long. So, talking about Jerusalem from a Jewish point of view, every Jewish person will probably have a different view on the religious significance of Jerusalem. It's based on where you live in the world or how you're brought up. It does, I think, it depends on each individual's level of faith. And I'll explain more about that, and I'm going to use me as an example. Although the divergence of Jewish religious sects does play a part, by that I mean the Orthodox Reform, the liberal and progressive movements, the Hasidim, they're the guys with the black coats and the hats, and the Chabad, they're also the same, are some of the main other movements. I think the question is far more about the beliefs of the individual. So, I'm a practicing Jew now, and I have been since I got married, 1985, 37 years. The research I did for this talk included quite a few things that I didn't know, and I really enjoyed doing it because I found the entire experience very enlightening. And there were, when I came across some things, there were a few wow moments, so it was great. So, using me as an example, I think it's going to help you to know a bit more about me and my upbringing and my background, so you can understand the religious significance of Jerusalem from my point of view. So I'm going to start off with my family. My parents were born in the 1910s and were second-generation immigrants. They lived in London, which was where I was born too. They came through the war, which I'm sure strongly coloured their feelings towards anti-Semitism, and I think because of the need of the Jewish community to stick together at that time, they ended up being very insular. One thing was for sure, having gone through the war against Germany, they wouldn't buy anything German. It was an Orthodox family, although my father, bless him, was far more interested in soccer on a Saturday than anything even mildly religious. Nothing came between him and his football. So the religious side of life was organised by my mother. They were, by today's standards, pretty Orthodox, and because they're Orthodox, I was brought up Orthodox too. I had my bar mitzvah, the coming of age, at St. John's Wood Synagogue, which is the seat of the chief rabbi. Thank goodness he wasn't there on the day, because I was nervous enough as it was. My religious teaching was on the lines of, let me just turn my page. My teaching was on the lines of, this is what we do. But I was never taught, this is why we do it, which meant my views on the significance of Jerusalem to my religion were very limited. Yes, I saw the film, the story of the Exodus from Egypt with Charlton Heston, and I knew at Passover time the last thing we said at the end of our Passover meal was next year in Jerusalem. But frankly, I didn't know the significance of it and what I was saying, or indeed the true meaning of any of it at all. That was how it was. You accepted things. Then, it was my teenage years, and like most teenagers, I was stereotypically rebellious. I had hair going down to here, would you believe, and haven't got it now. And I can remember having really extremely aggressive arguments with my mum and her side of the family about why we did things. Questioning the origins of the traditions was something one didn't do. So in my early teens, can't quite remember how old I was, 13, 14, I went to Israel with my parents, and because of my upbringing and not understanding why, I looked at the place from a secular point of view. All I can tell you is that my memories of that visit was to see a few biblical sites, which didn't mean much to me at that time, how expensive everything was, and I really didn't like the food. So there you go. That's part one of my talk. The religious significance of Jerusalem to me as a teenager, which can be summed up in 3 words, not a lot. So, now, of course my views have changed being a member of the Reform movement, because we are encouraged to question following Judaism through true knowledge is a must and to be expected. So now I'm going to get my TARDIS and go 25 years forward. So this part of my talk, I want to say that Jerusalem is unique among the cities of the world, with special, although differing claims on the religious and cultural sentiments of millions of Jews, Christians and Muslims. It is holy for our 3 monotheistic Abrahamic religions because of religiously significant events that took place in that city. The area itself had been traversed by the first Jew, Abraham, circa 1800 BC, and that's not before COVID. It's, okay. Mind you, we tend to think that now, don't we? During his wanderings throughout what was then we called the Promised Land, according to tradition, this place where Abraham nearly sacrificed his son Isaac, but was commanded by God not to do so, was on the spot that Jerusalem was built. This is where the biblical history of the Jewish people begins, when Abraham is told to travel to the Promised Land, the land I will show you. This is the start of the religious significance of Jerusalem. For Jewish people, Jerusalem is not merely a locus of holy sites or religiously and historically significant memories. The city itself is holy and has been so for at least 3,000 years. Jerusalem has become synonymous with hope and meaning in Jewish life from biblical times when God, as our tradition teaches, spoke of the place that he would choose for his people. The return of the Jewish people to Zion in our day, the continuous and unwavering centrality of Jerusalem in Jewish life, has been unquestioned. By the way, the name Zion indicates the Temple Mount and later came to signify Jerusalem as the capital city and eventually of the entire Holy Land. I found it interesting that one of the stories about this time was that of the children of Israel who wandered in the Sinai desert for 40 years. If you look at the map, the Sinai desert is not that big, so I'm sure the Almighty had a hand in their wanderings. Jews have lived in the land of Israel for nearly 4,000 years, going back to the period of the biblical patriarchs. The story of the Jewish people, biblical Israel, is capital Jerusalem, and the Jewish temple there has been one of exile, destruction, and rebirth. In its 4,000 years of history, Jerusalem has been destroyed many times and many times reborn. There has always been maintained a Jewish presence in the land of Israel and in Jerusalem, and the Jewish people as a whole always dreamed of returning to it and rebuilding it. Jerusalem was established as a city by King David. His son Solomon built the first temple there, establishing Jerusalem as a spiritual center, and virtually the entire Israelite nation converged on the city several times each year, bringing harvest offerings and other sacrifices. When in 1006 BCE, King David unified the tribes of Israel and captured Jerusalem, establishing there the center of his kingdom, Jerusalem became the primary symbol of the tribe's transition from peoplehood to statehood. The sacred nature of the city was assured. When, during the reign of King David, the Ark of the Covenant was brought up from Kiryat Yearim, which is west of Jerusalem, and later placed by his son Solomon in the first temple. As a reward for his act, God is said to have promised King Solomon that your dynasty and your sovereignty will stand firm before me and your throne forever secure. That comes from 2 Samuel chapter 17, verse 16. Judaism has a strong religious connection to Jerusalem and a belief that the city itself is connected to the Holy Temple, which once stood there. Such was the city's importance in biblical times that there were those who could not manage the journey. They were advised to at least pray towards Jerusalem, in which case their prayers would be heard as if they were present. To this day, all synagogues face Jerusalem, so that our prayers are directed there in accordance with that tradition. When Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BCE, and after it was rebuilt, it was destroyed again by the Romans in 70 CE. The sense of acute religious loss was expressed by adding a day of commemoration. That's a long word, isn't it? Commemoration. It's called Tisha B'Av, and that's added to the Jewish calendar, and which we still observe that. So this is another example of today's significance to Jewish people of the city of Jerusalem. I think that if you ask most Jewish people, and even most non-Jewish people, what they thought the most important place in Jerusalem for Judaism is, then I suspect the answer would be the Western Wall. So I've decided in my talk to speak to you mainly about this place for that reason. The holiest place in Judaism is considered to be the Temple Mount, where the second temple stood until it was destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE. Mistakenly, the Western Wall is generally thought to be the holiest site, but prayers at this location are a relatively recent phenomenon prompted by a Muslim conqueror. The Western Wall, or Kotel, in the old city of Jerusalem has figured prominently in the Jewish consciousness for centuries. Generations dreamed of appearing before the old stone wall even just once. Now the wall is active 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and the people praying there can cram paper into the cracks, between the regular stones so that they can make individual prayers. In fact, so many pieces of paper are crammed into the cracks that they have to be removed sometimes on a daily basis to allow more to be put in. The holiness of the Western Wall is due to its close proximity to the temple. The wall which we call today the Western Wall, which is not a part of the Holy Temple itself, was part of the Temple Mount retaining wall that Herod the Great built when he ambitiously expanded the Temple Mount and renovated the then dilapidated Second Temple. Jews throughout the ages have visited the Western Wall to offer prayers at this holy location, because, our sages teach, the divine presence that was manifest in the temple never departed. Furthermore, access to the holiest site of the world, the Temple Mount itself, is prevented by Jewish law, which forbids entry to the temple site, which is in a state of ritual impurity. Thus, the Western Wall constitutes the closest possible point to what we call the gateway to heaven. In the second half of the 16th century, Suleiman the Magnificent gave Jews exclusive rights to worship at the Western Wall. The prayer area was small, closed off by a wall running parallel to the wall, and hemmed in by a residential area. It stayed that way until 1947. There are some unusual facts I discovered about the Western Wall, which you might like to know. Many of the wall's subterranean stones uncovered by the archaeologists in the course of their excavations are extraordinarily large, bigger than any stone found in the pyramids. Some of the stones weigh hundreds of tons. The Western Wall is also known as the Wailing Wall. This name was given by non-Jewish observers who were accustomed to see Jews gathering at the wall and wailing in prayer and wailing in mourning for the destroyed holy temples. Jews were mainly in exile for the next 2,000 years, but kept Jerusalem's memory intact as a symbol of national unity. In Jewish law, Jerusalem is considered the centre or navel of the world, from which benefits to all nations flow. The beauty of Jerusalem is thought to exceed all other beauties of the world. It is quoted that of the 10 portions of beauty which came down to the world, Jerusalem took 9. It was in Jerusalem, tradition teaches, that all great events of history took place or are destined to occur, from the creation of the world, the binding of Isaac, and the establishment of the inner sanctuary of the temple, the Holy of Holies, to the dawn of the Messianic era and the resurrection of the dead. The significance of Jerusalem is also apparent in the proliferation of sources from the Bible onward that refer to the city. The Hebrew Bible mentions Jerusalem by that name some 700 times, and by the name of Zion some 150 times. The implicit references to Jerusalem and Zion are even more numerous. In the words of Isaiah, chapter 2, verse 3, and Micah, chapter 4, verse 2, are one of the most important prayers for us. For out of Zion will come forth Torah and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Over the centuries, Jerusalem has also taken on a redemptive significance based on its root meaning, Ir Shalom, city of peace, with the hope that it will become a place of harmony for all peoples and in the capital of a world at one with itself. For 3,000 years, Jews have turned towards Jerusalem for spiritual, cultural, and national inspiration. After the destruction of the city by the Romans almost 2,000 years ago, the city has been ruled by a succession of conquerors: Roman, Byzantine, Persian, Arabian, Crusaders, Egyptian, Turkish, British, and Jordanian. So I'm now near the end of my talk. Jerusalem is such an amazing place that I did feel I had to talk about the city in general, and one main site in particular. Otherwise, I'd never stop. I'd be here all night, so forgive me for that. So to me, the significance of Jerusalem is so great that to all the religions, that I don't believe its true importance to all of our faiths will come until all the peoples find a way to live in harmony in Jerusalem. So it really does become the city of peace. There's a couple more things I want to tell you. I've done this talk a couple of times before, and I've added some things for this talk. They came into my mind, and I thought you might be interested in them. A few years ago, and ever since I decided to put this in, I can't remember how many, maybe 5 or 6, but I'm not sure. Anti-Semitism in the UK became worse. Now, we have an organisation, Community Securities Trust, which deals with the security of the synagogues and Jewish sites, Jewish schools, all that sort of stuff. because I was chair at that time, so no, it can only be about 5 years ago then, I saw some videos of synagogues being attacked, one of which was filmed on a mobile inside one of the synagogues. Coupled with this, they insisted we strengthened our security with a special front door that was bulletproof. It was something that some of our, we'll call them elders, took one look at. This isn't right, but it was necessary. Some of our members stayed away in fear. I remember just after we had it put up, our Passover was coming along. My daughter was coming with me, and she said, I'm not going. I said, why? I'm worried we're going to be attacked. I said, you're quite safe. Anyway, I persuaded her, but she wasn't very happy. I found it so scary and frightening, and even my thoughts made me think of leaving the UK, something I wouldn't have dreamt that I would ever think about. Thinking about it, though, Israel was not for me. Even though I would have been accepted without question, things are a lot better now, thank goodness. And I just want to give you a little story, and it's about religions and what religions are within themselves. So I've mentioned how Judaism has different Reform, Orthodox, Hasidic, all of those. We're lucky to have a visiting rabbi who comes to us once a month, and he does all the High Holy Day services. He's retired now, comes from up north. And one sermon that he did 3 months ago stunned me, and there's a part of it that I've put in here. He went to a Jewish school, had a lot of Jewish friends, like all kids. They all make friends and have a great time. But by sheer chance, not that long ago, he's walking along the street, and on the other side of the road, he saw an old friend, very grown-up old friend, as it were. By the way he dressed, he knew this was an ultra-Orthodox man. So I said before, so he would have a black coat, black hat, that sort of thing. They chatted for a bit, and our rabbi was asked what he did for a living. He said he was a progressive rabbi, to which this man said, you're lucky I don't have a knife with me. As if I did, I'd kill you. Now, this is all within our religion. So this is one of the main problems. I tend to have a view that says for all the religions to come together the way they should, each religion has got to sort itself out first, because you can't argue amongst yourself and then hope to bring everybody else on board. So there's a bit of a personal view there. So, to finish off my talk, a peaceful Jerusalem which would show the way to the world of how people with diverging views can truly live in peace. That's my prayer, and thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. In October 1991, I went on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land for the first and only time in my life. The pilgrimage lasted for 10 days, of which only 2 or 3 were in Jerusalem. Like other Christian pilgrims, I was there to follow in the footsteps of Jesus. The Holy Land for Christians has been called the Fifth Gospel. My memory of my visit to Jerusalem is a little hazy after 31 years, but I think our coach stopped not far from the Western Wall, the remains of the ancient temple, as Mark has described. We'd heard that some Muslim pilgrims from Galilee had just arrived in Jerusalem, which moved me greatly, because this brought the past right into the present. We then visited the Dome of the Rock, the Muslim shrine built on the site of the ancient Jewish temple. It was here that Abraham almost sacrificed his son, Isaac according to Jewish belief, and Ishmael according to Muslim belief. In this area, or near it, Jesus made a protest by overturning the tables of the money changers at the beginning of the last week of his life. In the view of many biblical scholars, it was this that sealed Jesus' fate in the eyes of the temple authorities. Judaism in the first century was a broad church, but one thing the authorities wouldn't tolerate was physical or verbal attacks on the temple. Christians tend to see Jesus' attack on the money changers as a protest against sharp practice. But it may have been more than that. It may have been a prophetic sign that God was intending to replace the temple. Centuries before, the prophet Jeremiah had smashed a pot before the leaders of Jerusalem and warned them that God was about to smash the city in a similar way. So it may be that Jesus was saying, in effect, that just as he had swept away the tables of the money changers, so God was about to sweep away the temple. And that interpretation was certainly placed upon his actions. In the Gospels of Mark and Matthew, witnesses allege that Jesus had said, "I will pull down this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made with hands." Mark and Matthew describe them as false witnesses, but this may have been written to align Jesus with the righteous sufferer of Psalm 27. False witnesses rise against me, spouting malicious accusations. In the Gospel of John, when Jesus is challenged to produce a sign justifying his upsetting of the tables of the money changers, he replies, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up again." John adds his interpretation that Jesus was speaking about the temple of his body rather than the temple building. But there was clearly a memory that Jesus had spoken words that could be taken as a threat against the temple. Jesus was a worrying person to have in Jerusalem during Passover week, when the usual population of 25 to 30,000 was swollen tenfold by pilgrims. During Passover, the Jews recalled how God had rescued their ancestors from slavery in Egypt. Inevitably, it stirred hopes that he would soon rescue them from present-day oppressors. Many prayed that God would send them a new King David, a liberator. According to the Gospel of John, on one occasion already, some people had attempted to seize Jesus and proclaim him king. John also records a meeting of the temple authorities where they discussed the threat posed by Jesus. People might riot in his name, and the Romans would come down hard in retaliation. The temple might be endangered by the conflagration. The high priest was charged with helping maintain public order, and if he failed to do so, he would be replaced. To make the point, the Roman governor took charge of the high priest's vestments and only handed them over on the Day of Atonement. The high priest at the time of the death of Jesus was Joseph ben Caiaphas, who was in office for 19 years. His immediate predecessors and successors each held office for just a few years each, which suggests that Caiaphas was the sort of man that the Romans could do business with. But why had Jesus gone up to Jerusalem, putting his head into the lion's mouth, so to speak? He went there as a pious Jew to keep the Passover, but also to bring his message of the dawning of God's kingdom and the need for people to ready themselves for it. For God was about to fulfill the promise he had made through Isaiah. On this mountain, the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wine, of rich food full of marrow, of aged wine well refined. And he will swallow up on this mountain the covering that is cast over all peoples, the veil that is spread over all nations. He will swallow up death forever, and the Lord God will wipe away tears from all faces, and the reproach of his people he will take away from all the earth, for the Lord has spoken. It will be said on that day, "Behold, this is our God. We have waited for him, that he might save us. This is the Lord. We have waited for him. Let us be glad and rejoice in his salvation." God was about to cast out the evil one from the earth and put an end to disease, want, and oppression, taught Jesus. A time of plenty would follow, in which many would come from east and west and recline at table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of God. God would finally be obeyed on earth as in heaven. Jesus would be king and his 12 disciples co-rulers. You who have followed me will sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel, he said. There were those who believed that God would only intervene in the world when the Jews showed themselves worthy by taking up arms against the Romans. God helps those who help themselves, so to speak. But Jesus was not of that persuasion. God had already decided to intervene. The time has arrived. The kingdom of God is upon you. People should prepare themselves by loving God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, and by loving their neighbours as themselves. Undoubtedly, Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, knew about Jesus already, for his spies were everywhere. But according to the Gospels, the temple authorities got in first because one of Jesus' followers agreed to betray him. Why Judas betrayed Jesus is unclear. It's unlikely simply to be a matter of money. Perhaps he had concluded that Jesus wasn't the Messiah after all. Why might Judas have become disillusioned? The Gospels say that Jesus tried to impress upon his disciples that death, not triumph, awaited him in Jerusalem. But they didn't take on board what he was saying and kept squabbling over who would have the best jobs in his administration. Their reaction wasn't really surprising. For the Messiah, the King of the Jews, was expected to be a successful leader who would found a new kingdom for the Jews. The idea of a suffering Messiah had never been heard of before. As the two disciples said to the mysterious stranger on the road to Emmaus, our chief priests and rulers handed Jesus over to be sentenced to death, but we had been hoping he was to be the liberator of Israel. A crucified man could not fulfill what was expected of the Messiah. But what of those passages from the Hebrew Scriptures beloved of Christians, such as Isaiah 53? He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. But this man had always been understood as an everyman figure, an embodiment of Israel, whose sufferings were in the past. Note those words, he was despised. He's talking about someone, the prophet is talking about someone before his time, not coming after. Before Jesus, no one had thought of applying Isaiah 53 to the coming Messiah. And the same is true of other favourite texts, such as Psalm 22 and Zechariah chapter 12. Christians had to scour the Scriptures for texts about suffering servants of God and combine them with texts about the Messiah in order to defend the novel concept of a suffering Messiah. So it's easy to imagine how Judas became disillusioned with Jesus. You suffer and die if you will, but I didn't sign up for this. Perhaps Judas was listening more carefully to what Jesus was saying than the others. Judas led an arresting party to the Garden of Gethsemane, a name meaning oil press, where Jesus had gone to pray after a shared meal, which may or may not have been a Passover meal, depending upon which gospel you read. Probably, Judas didn't simply act as a guide, but as an informant as well. In the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus is very reticent about claiming to be the Messiah in public. Judas may have informed the chief priests that Jesus was privately telling his disciples that he was the Messiah, which would have been sedition as far as the Romans were concerned. According to the Gospels of Mark and Matthew, Jesus was then subjected to a kangaroo court. But the Gospels of Luke and John say there was just an informal examination, which is more likely. All Gospels agree that Jesus was then taken before the Roman governor, Pilate. Now, a number of Jewish scholars suggest that the Jewish authorities had no hand at all in the arrest and death of Jesus, that the Gospel writers distorted the facts to exonerate the Romans, and to shift the blame onto the Jewish authorities. There is probably some truth in that. But even if the Jewish authorities did have a hand in Jesus' arrest, they were not the wicked people of legend, but worried men acting to protect their temple and nation. Better that one man should die than that the whole nation be destroyed. It's unlikely that a crowd gathered at Pilate's headquarters, howling for the death of Jesus, as the Gospels relate. If there was such a crowd, it could only have consisted of temple employees who were in the know. According to the Gospel of Mark, Jesus was crucified at 9 o'clock in the morning, which suggests that his trial was rushed through before his supporters could mobilize. Most certainly, the Jewish people were not collectively responsible for the death of Jesus. During his lifetime, most Jews had never even heard of him. The Gospels portray Pontius Pilate as a well-meaning but weak man who was manipulated into condemning Jesus by the chief priests. But the real Pilate was a man notorious for brutality. The Gospel of Luke says that on one occasion, Pilate had Galilean pilgrims killed while they were at worship, and the Jewish historian Josephus reports that he was eventually removed as governor for massacring Samaritans. He wouldn't have lost any sleep at all about condemning Jesus. According to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus kept silence during his trial. But in Roman law, refusing to answer a question was taken as an admission of guilt. So the trial of Jesus was probably brief. In the past, most scholars believed that Pilate's residence was in the Antonia fortress next door to the temple. But it's now thought more likely that his residence was in the palace of Herod the Great in the west of the city. If so, the Way of the Cross, the Via Dolorosa, which pilgrims follow, starts in the wrong place and goes by the wrong route. Jesus was led out of the city through a gate on the northwest. Just outside of the gate was a rocky outcrop above a disused quarry. It was a prominent place, so the Romans used it for executions. According to the Gospel of John, the Romans ensured that Jesus and those crucified with him were dead and taken down from their crosses before the Sabbath, which began at around 6 p.m. The Gospels say that Joseph of Arimathea, one of the Jewish council, ensured that Jesus was buried in a rock tomb in a nearby garden, presumably in the disused quarry area below. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre claims to enclose both Golgotha and the site of the empty tomb. The ground was built over and cut into, vandalism really, over the centuries, so that you now have to climb a staircase to reach to the place of crucifixion, and you go across it and then you come back down by a staircase on the other side. And then you go backwards to the Edicule, which is the supposed tomb of Jesus. The original tomb was destroyed many centuries ago, but the remains of it are said to be beneath the present monument, which was built in 1808. When the Romans built their pagan city, Aelia Capitolina, on the ruins of Jerusalem in the 2nd century, it is claimed that they built a temple to Venus on the site of the tomb of Jesus to mock Christians. And this had the unintended effect of marking out the site for the future when the empire became Christian. Well, many think this story is just a little bit too convenient. And be that as it may, archaeologists think that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is the only credible claimant for the site of the tomb of Jesus, as the alternative site, identified by General Gordon in the 19th century, is too far outside the city walls as they were at the time of Jesus to be a possibility. Belief in the resurrection did not come out of the blue, and Mark mentioned the expectation of the general resurrection. The book of Daniel says, "Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. When God's kingdom eventually came on earth, there would be a general resurrection of the dead, many believed. What was unique about the Christian claim was that Jesus had risen ahead of the general resurrection. According to the convert Paul of Tarsus, Jesus had been raised as the first fruits of the harvest of the dead. The rest would soon follow. During the intervening time, it was his task to reach out to the Gentiles, who it was believed would be gathered to Israel before the end times. As Zechariah had prophesied, in those days, 10 people from nations of every language will take hold of the robe of one Jew and say, "Let us accompany you, for we have heard that God is with you." In conclusion, the Gospel of Luke says that the women who visited the tomb of Jesus were told by angels, "Why search among the dead for one who is alive?" And that's why a pilgrimage to Jerusalem has never been made an obligatory part of the faith for Christians. Christians believe that Jesus can be found at all times and in all places. But for those Christians who do go to the Holy Land, it's still a moving experience to walk in the footsteps of Jesus. Thank you.
Can you all see me? This is quite tall, so as long as you can see me, that's good. Oh wow, very fancy. There's a little, oh, is this it? The little step? Oh, fantastic. It's catered for all of us. Okay. So obviously being a teacher, I like to be a bit more interactive. I like to talk to you. I want to wake you up a little bit. So what I would usually do after a whole session of maths and English, I would ask you to stand up and just stretch. So can you just stand up for me? Thank you. Give yourself a good shake. Maybe say hello to the person next to you. Hello. Introduce yourselves. And I have kids like that saying, "Hello, chair. How are you today?" Fantastic. Excellent. Sit down for me. That's brilliant. We're all awake, right? That's so, so important. Okay, so I need somebody with a mobile phone that has access to Google. So I need 2 people. You have access to Google. Why do you have your phone? That's my son. Okay, so can I have you? And one more person? Anyone at the back? Yeah, phone over there, fantastic. So I'd like for you to research the word precious, please. And tell me what you find as the definition of the word precious. When Wi-Fi works, right? Oh, okay. Okay, English, please. Fantastic, thank you very much. And can I have the definition of sacred from yourself, please? Fantastic. Thank you so much. Well done, guys. Thank you. You get a point for that. So basically, in terms of these both words, when it comes to Palestine, and when I was asked to deliver this talk, the first thing that came to my mind was both these words was sacred and precious. And surely, when you have something that has so much value and love and connection, then naturally everybody wants a piece of it, right? Like a chocolate cake, everybody wants to have their part. So Palestine is both sacred and precious for many people and always has been. Islam is a faith and a way of life that has been shared and practiced for centuries worldwide. Some parts of the earth carry a deep and memorable legacy of Islam, and Palestine is admired as an important land since the beginning of time. Palestine is a land of blessings and prophethood. The word Palestine, actually, because obviously we do this, all the definitions are so important. The word Palestine actually derives from Philistia, the name given by Greek writers to the land of Philistines, who in the 12th century BC occupied a small pocket of land on the southern coast between modern Tel Aviv, Yaffo, and Gaza. The name was revived by the Romans in the 2nd century CE. I'm not sure if you were, but this is a bit of information, that currently, despite being existed so much on the map for thousands of years, if you actually try to Google Palestine, it actually doesn't exist on Google Maps anymore. So that's just a bit of information for you. Palestine is a nation that is embedded in Islamic history and significance. Some of those reasons are ones I would like to expand on further today. So number one, Palestine, some names that you might be familiar with, is a home to lots and lots of different prophets. For example, Abraham, Isaac, Yaqub, David, Suleiman, which is Solomon, Zachariah, Isa, which is Jesus, and Yahya, which is John. They all lived in Palestine amongst many other prophets. The miraculous birth of Jesus also took place, as you mentioned, in Palestine, along with his mother Mary. It is also said that Abraham and Isaac are also buried in Hebron in Palestine. So we as Muslims have utmost love for all prophets, and in fact, in the Quran, Jesus is mentioned 107 times. And we also have a chapter in the Quran which is named after both Abraham and Maryam, which is Mary. Secondly, Allah refers God to Palestine as the Holy Land in reference to its purity and its sanctity in Islam. Number three, Palestine is home to the third holiest mosque in Islam, which is, you may have heard of it, Masjid al-Aqsa, which is Al-Aqsa, the Far East. It was actually the mosque, this first mosque was actually the direction of prayer that was prescribed to Muhammad. So it's the direction that we used to pray. Any ideas which way we pray now? And it's not TK Maxx. Any ideas which direction we pray in? Mecca? Is it that way? You seem pretty sure about that. Yeah, possibly it is, because you saw us praying at the beginning, right? Good observation. Excellent. So actually we pray to Mecca now. And however, that transition was a really difficult transition for Muhammad at that particular time. There's also something that really is sort of miraculous for Muslims, is the belief of the night journey. And that was when the Prophet Muhammad was taken from Mecca. He had quite a sluggish time at that time. He was quite down, things weren't going too well. And so Allah, God, gave him a gift to go on this night journey, actually within seconds. So it was transpiring from Mecca to go to Masjid al-Aqsa, which is Al-Aqsa, in Palestine, and then go on the night journey through the heavens. Number 5, it is a land in which David defeated Goliath. A bit of information. Have you heard of that story? Yeah, I'm sure you have, the giant. Yes, so it's a true story where there was a war and that did take place. Number 6, it also is the land in which Jesus will defeat Messiah ad-Dajjal. So we believe there's going to be an Antichrist, and on the day of judgment, Jesus, being all brave and amazing that he is going to defeat the Antichrist. And it's referenced in one of the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, which means peace be upon him. The son of Maryam, Mary, will kill Dajjal at the gates of Lud, and this is in Jerusalem. However, over the past 60 years or so, we are all aware that Palestine is going through so much hardship, and this is straining all of us pretty much. It's straining the land, it's straining the people, and it's straining the people and its environment. But as a nation and as a community and as humans, it should pain us to see anything valuable, sacred, significant, suffer any type of misuse, neglect, or harm. Similarly, something that holds so much weight in the eyes of God means so much more than just its dates and its olives. There is a saying in Islam that when one part of the body suffers, then the whole body is affected. The profound gem, our gem, holds value in the hearts of Palestinians, Muslims, and non-Muslims around the globe. And why would anyone want to see it fall and crumble? Abdul Hamid II, the Sultan, the last Sultan of Turkey, he was asked by Theodore Herzl if he could have a piece of Palestine to establish a state. And Abdul Hamid II said, "It's not mine to give, but it belongs to the people, as they have shed blood to defend this land, and Palestine is not mine to give." So Palestine was under the Ottomans for approximately 400 years until it fell after the First World War. The secret, my respected listeners, is to remember that Muslims Jews and Christians have and do live together. When Umar, he was the third leader of the Muslims, made his way to Jerusalem after conquering it in 638, Umar cleared the area as it used to be used as a dumping ground by the Romans, and he cleared it with his own bare hands. And at that time, the Jews were exiled. He gave Jewish families their own area in Jerusalem, located in what was now the Jewish quarter of the old city. There they were allowed to build a religious college, a synagogue, and to pray in the neighborhood of Temple Mount, once the site of Solomon's temple. We need to go back there. We need to go back to these ways. And this is the teaching of Islam. When one would ask for a helping hand, naturally we'd open our doors. So what can we do? Don't switch off from the current climate in Palestine, but in fact, look, listen, and liaise. I created that myself, by the way. So yes, we will feel pain and we'll feel sadness, but that should spark the flame of change. It will cause us to focus and look for a solution. We should always maintain our prayers and believe that God will give us the tool to cope with this problem, and he will take those that are suffering out of pain. But the thing is, with myself and the way I do things, rather than, getting upset about the situation, we need to think of what we can do where we are. So what can we do in little old Wales and Barry Island? What change can we make? What is missing, and what do we need to re-establish? We need to establish brotherhood and unity, and this is the core principle of all faiths. People worldwide have had rights over one another simply by the nature of their shared belief system, their relationship, their ethics, and their morals. But ultimately, the situation starts from us, our homes, our neighborhood, and our community. We must treat one another well, support one another towards the truth, guide one another against wrongdoing, and more. The Quran discusses brotherhood in Islam as a blessing and unity as an obligation, and it was exemplified in the way the companions of the Prophet treated one another. We need to raise our children as ambassadors of this country, where they tolerate one another, they respect one another, they build a strong community of compassion and support. But additionally, let's give them the mechanisms to speak out when something is morally, ethically, and religiously wrong. Where there isn't a just leader, then there will be nothing but destruction and disruption. This is whether one is a leader of a household, a business, an organization, service, or even a classroom. And trust me, I know. Where there is a free for all, there's no way one can establish peace. Have we lost our faith? Have we lost the teachings of our scriptures? And now we pick and choose? Well, the result is all around us. If we lose our path, then we lose our vision. And we lose that, then we have lost our goal. And instead, we breed a nation that is full of impatient, inconsiderate, power-driven, greedy, selfish, and thoughtless individuals. What happened to being safe on the streets? What happened to having a nice chat over the fence with your neighbour? What happened to the youth respecting their parents? What happened to saying a prayer before your meal? What happened to being honest in business? People have become scared to stand up as people of faith, scared to discipline the defiant child, scared to stand up by their faith or even have core principles of being a good Samaritan? Or is it the fact that we've stopped caring and become lazy? The Prophet Muhammad said, "The best of you are those that have the best manner and the best character." Additionally, the Prophet Muhammad stated, "Whosoever of you sees an evil, let him change it with his hands. And if he is not able to do so, then let him change it with his tongue. And if he is not able to do so, then with his heart." And that is the weakest of faith. This quote reminds us that we can't just stand back and watch as acts of injustice take place. We need to spread tolerance, love, compassion, respect, and ensure the safeguarding and well-being of our community is number one priority. This is how we'll establish justice and fairness. Let's make our homes full of joy, faith, tranquility, and peace. Let's spread support and aid and help people and stop becoming desensitized. Islam aims to promote taking care of those who are helpless, both physically and emotionally, spiritually and financially. It is with the understanding of these concepts that the importance of Palestine is embedded within Islam. We are propelled to support and stand by our Palestinians and its citizens. I have a dream. I have a dream that one day we will see peace in the world, but it needs to start within our homes, and by holding firmly to the religion of the most wise and the most merciful, Allah Almighty. It is time, my respected listeners, it is time to get Palestine back on the map and dissolve our conflicts today. Thank you for listening.